but not outside the city. And I hear the city is very different from this county. So I was talking with the Herald about that. So yes, my name is Bryan Cafferky. My friends call me Bryan. My neighbors call me Bryan. I invite my students to call me Bryan. My parents call me Bryan. Sometimes my children call me Bryan. So I don't need the doctor in front. You can just say Bryan. But do whatever is most comfortable for you. Trying to move through here, Rohan. Great. So this picture here, this is Mesopotamian artwork. And this was around during the time of Abraham. He would have seen this Mesopotamian artwork, and he would have known that this represented the tree of life. So I'm trying to reach way back through history to look at the story of Abraham. In fact, most of tonight, we're just going to be walking through the story of Genesis, looking at Abraham's family to identify different patterns that are passed down from generation to generation to find out what could we learn about our own patterns. Because I believe we are patterned individuals. We learn things from our family of origin, and we carry those same dance steps, those same behaviors to our other relationships, all right? So because we are patterned individuals, if we look back to see where we learn these things, we can have some opportunity to increase our insight and make different decision choices when it comes to our other relationships. So I'm 45 years old. I'm from Southern California. I was a pastor for about 4 or 5 years before I transitioned to family therapy. I teach at Loma Linda. I have 2 children, both through IVF, so in vitro fertilization. We've had some losses along the way. My wife stays at home with the kids, and I work full-time at Loma Linda. I practice family therapy, and then 8 to 10 times a year, I travel around the U.S. speaking to churches about families, because I love talking about families with churches, because I was sitting in the pews wanting to learn more about families. That's why I pursued this direction that I'm currently moving in. This is my family. So I have an 8-year-old, a 4-year-old, and my wife, Jenny. So this is our Christmas card picture. So Merry Christmas to you. So we'll be focusing on Abraham's family dynamic. So strap in. We have about 2 hours worth, going as fast as we can, but we're watching through this one-way mirror of time. When I was learning how to become a family therapist, we'd sit in this dark room closest to us, and we would watch therapy happening through this one-way mirror. So we would be asking questions. What's going on with this family? Why is the clinician, the therapist, going this direction? What's going on here? So a lot of conversation in the back room about what's happening. We cannot directly interact with Abraham's family, but it's very clear in the book of Genesis what's happening in that family. So we can get curious tonight about what some of those family patterns were. What was it like to be in his family? How did they resolve conflict? How did they deal with anxiety? Did they experience prejudice and discrimination? What were the rules of that family? I think there are some pretty clear instances to give us some good ideas about what it's like to be in that family. And if we can understand those family patterns, we can see how those patterns are passed down from generation to generation. Likewise, I'm hoping this provides us an opportunity to think about our own family patterns in our own family tree. In fact, one of the first things we're going to do this evening is walk you through how to read a genogram. A genogram is like a family tree, but we're not just interested in biological relationships. We're interested in how people are relating to each other, how they're getting along or not getting along. Because if trauma can be inherited from one generation to the next, and so can love, emotional intelligence, and wisdom. And the biblical narrative about Abraham's family in Genesis is full of courageous acts. It's full of faith. It's full of sacrifice. Really good things in the family, right? But there are also some cautionary tales, perhaps, right? Things that happen in the family. And the author of Genesis did not want to whitewash that family. Instead, they have so much rich nuance in the family dynamics to show that, man, even though families aren't perfect, God is still interested in working with families. So we're going to dive into that family to learn what it would be like to be in that family. And every behavior is a symptom of the system, meaning all of our behaviors usually align with rules in our family or the system. So for example, I'm standing up here, right? And almost everybody else is sitting down, correct? I did not have to state that. People just knew this is what it means to be in this situation. Bryan has a microphone. Nobody else has a microphone. Because these are the subtle rules of the system, right? In every system, in every family, there are specific rules. Sometimes they are explicit. They're posted. Like when you're in school, maybe younger grades, they had posted rules about what it means to be in the classroom. But maybe I don't see any posted rules here, but yet we all know how we're supposed to act and behave. So we learn those patterns from other people. So everything we learn is usually caught and taught. And every behavior is a symptom of the system. So these are gummy bears to show you how people are related to one another. On the left-hand side, we have, the top left, we have a red gummy bear and a yellow gummy bear, and they have two offspring gummy bears. It's a split between them. Do you see that? And then the gummy bear that's offspring on the right is partnered with this lime green gummy bear right here, and they have 3 children, so on and so forth. So we can see how the different gummy bears produce offspring and how they're related to one another. And this is just the framework for a family tree, and a genogram is similar to a family tree, but we're more interested in how people are relating to one another. So I've been doing this seminar for 15 years, and every year it changes, and I keep getting requests, how do I make my own genogram? Because as a professor at Loma Linda, I have all my students make their own genogram. As a therapist, I have all my clients also make a genogram with me, so I want to show you how to make your own genogram so you can go back and do the same sort of thing at home. We're going to start on the top left. We have Thornton and Becca. So when you make a genogram, those who identify as male, you put a square, and those who identify as female, a circle. So we see Thornton and Becca have partnered together, and there's 3 offspring. There's Tyson, James, and Christy. Now, at the time when this genogram was created, we see there are some X's through some individuals. See that Thornton has an X through him, and James has an X through James. That means when this genogram was created, those people had passed away. The person who created this genogram was Dahlia right here. We know that because she's the identified person with that rectangle around her. So we know that all of this is from Dahlia's perspective. So we have Tyson, James, and Christy. We see that James has partnered with Roxy, and they've had 2 children, Jeff and Tricia. We see that Roxy, her parents, Gladys, has passed away, and then there's that double hash mark between Gladys and this square that has question marks. That means Gladys and her partner are divorced. At this point in time, we do not know who her partner's name was. It's just a question mark. Because sometimes we don't have access to all of this information. We see in the top right, Ricky and Catalina. They had twins. We know they're twins because those 2 boxes of Roberto and Martin come from the same spot in the line, so we know they are twins. We know Roberto partnered with Karina, and at this point in time, Karina's passed away, and they had 3 children, Sophia, Emily, Damien. Damien partnered with Lily, and they have a daughter, Berenice. We see Jeff partnered with Sophia, and we have Dahlia and Philip. How are we doing reading this? Doing okay? Okay, we're going to move on. This is what I want to get to. So we'll go back. So here's the structure of this family. Now here's how the family interacts, and this is why I'm here today. On the bottom left, you have a legend, so you can use that legend to help you identify what the different symbols are. So we have a close relationship, a double parallel green line. That means those 2 people are close in a good way. We have 3 red parallel lines. This is a fused relationship, meaning these people are too close with one another. It's uncomfortable. They're up in each other's business. When I get upset, they get upset. We're just too close in an unhealthy way. We have a jagged red line, which shows there's conflict. We have a jagged blue line with an arrow showing abuse. So the person that the arrow is coming from is the perpetrator, and the person who's receiving the arrow is the person who's the survivor or the victim of that perpetration. We have a dotted gray line to show emotional distance, and then we have a dotted red line with a hash mark here that shows emotional cutoff. So we're going to walk through this and talk how these patterns are showcasing themselves in this genogram. On the top left, Thornton and Becca. There's emotional cutoff between Becca and her partner, Thornton, between her 2 male children, Tyson and James, but her and Christy are really close in this fused, enmeshed relationship. So in this family, the females are cut off from the males. There's not this emotional connection between them. If you go over to the middle, we have Gladys, who perpetrated abuse towards her only child, Roxy, and we see Roxy is a source of a lot of drama. She perpetrated abuse towards her sister-in-law, Christy, towards her 2 children, Jeff and Tricia, and there's tension between Roxy and other people in the family, right? So it'd be really easy to write off Roxy as someone who is trouble, right? Drama queen, black sheep of the family. But maybe Roxy is only using the playbook that was given to her in her family. Maybe in her family, we were not allowed to be close and caring of one another because being close with someone meant to be hurt by them. So maybe there's a chance she keeps people at arm's length. Why? In order to protect herself, right? So maybe she is creating a lot of conflict in order to survive her life, and maybe this is just what she's used to. In fact, has anyone ever been out to a hot tub or jacuzzi during wintertime? Yeah, okay. Some of you, some like this, some like this. So the temperature difference between the cold air and the hot water can be pretty spicy, right? If you put your foot in hot water and it's really cold outside, you're going to notice that temperature difference, and it might be tingly on your foot in an unpleasant way. In a similar manner, people who don't know what it's like to be in a safe relationship, when they start to experience some of that vulnerability, that might be too much for them. It might be too spicy for them because they're used to a very cold temperature when it comes to their relationship. So there's a chance Roxy is just using the playbook that she was given, and she doesn't know anything else other than this. On the top right, we have Ricky and Catalina, have a close relationship. And they have two sons that are twins, Roberto and Martin, and those are close. We see there's Roberto is distant from Sophia, but is really close with Emily, and Karina is really close with Damien. We see that Sophia has a close relationship with Dahlia, and Jeff has a close relationship with Philip. So as I'm looking at this, I see how Jeff was distant from his father, so maybe he thought, when I grew up, I want to make sure that my son knows that he is important. So if I ever have a son, I'm going to connect with him. And maybe Sophia, Dahlia's mother, if you look, Sophia has two siblings, and Roberto and Karina, the fathers and mother, both have a close relationship with the siblings of Sophia, but not Sophia herself. So maybe Sophia is thinking, if I ever have a daughter, I'm going to make sure that I let her know that she is important and I care for her. So now all of a sudden, we have a father and a mother, we have Jeff and Sophia coming into this family of procreation, this family of choice, and they have a son and a daughter, and each of them is aligning closely with a different child, and there's some distance between Jeff and Sophia, and that is mirrored by the conflict between the siblings, between Dahlia and Philip. How are we feeling about this? Anybody have any questions about what we're seeing here? I'm seeing no hands. That could be an indicator that I'm not explaining it well. It could be that this is a lot of new information, right? It could be that we're just trying to wrap our head around reading something new. Has anyone ever seen a genogram before, or is this the first time? Okay, so some said, yeah, okay, great. So I think this is a great tool to understand the behaviors that are passed down from generation to generation and to explain why people might be behaving in a certain way. So we're going to use a genogram like this to track the family behaviors in the book of Genesis, to see what's going on in Abraham's family. All right, here we go. Oh yes, I'll be using the terms stress and anxiety interchangeably tonight, even though they are distinct in difference, but they manifest themselves very similarly in our body physiologically. When I'm stressed, I know why I'm stressed. I'm stressed because I have to finish this assignment. I'm stressed because rent is due at the end of the month. I'm stressed because April 15, I have to fulfill my taxes. So I know why I'm anxious. And it's because of a very specific reason. And when that's the case, it's me being stressed, not anxious. But when I'm anxious, I don't always know exactly why I'm feeling that way. It's hard for me to put my finger on it. Whereas if I'm stressed because of these 4 reasons, for example, I'm a little bit stressed about tomorrow night. I fly out of Baltimore and I go to Louisville, and I'm a little bit stressed about the weather, right? I know exactly why I'm stressed. I might say, oh, I feel anxious in my body because of that. Well, if I know the specific reason, it's stress, not anxiety. But I'll be using them interchangeably tonight because stress and anxiety manifest themselves the same way physiologically in our bodies. We pass on stress and anxiety in our families from one relationship to the next, to the next, to the next. So we'll be talking about that this weekend, today and tomorrow as well. We pass on stress like a hot potato. Stress is passed down from generation to generation like a precious family heirloom. And so we receive stress from other people, as well as the coping mechanisms to deal with that stress, as well as the coping mechanisms to deal with that anxiety. And sometimes our coping mechanisms actually keep that anxiety and that stress alive, because sometimes our coping mechanisms cause more problems than the problems themselves, right? Okay. So what are some of Abraham's family rules? I'll be curious about what are the intergenerational patterns of behavior. This is just a fancy way to say monkey see, monkey do. What are their patterns that are taught and passed down from generation to generation? How do they handle anxiety and tension? How do they experience prejudice and discrimination? Who are the villains in the family? Who are the heroes in the family? And does anyone know what chapter the story of Abraham begins? Anyone know? Off the top of your head? 15, okay. Any others? As you probably know, in the original Hebrew text, the chapter breaks weren't numbered, all right? So in some ways, the way that the chapter breaks we have in our English Bible, those are put in later. Some might say artificially, others might say intentionally, right? When we often think of the story of Abraham, we think about God's call to Abraham. God's calling Abraham to come and listen to him, to go down to the land of Canaan in the wild, wild west. But the story of Abraham actually begins before God calls him. And the narrator sets up the story to tell us, here are the stakes for this family. Here's what's important. I'm getting some goosebumps. Here are the stakes for this family. So let's see what the narrator says about this family. It begins Genesis 11, between Abram and Sarai. I'm going to do my best to keep it Abram and Sarai before their names are changed to Abraham and Sarah, but it might slip up a little bit because I have a human tongue, and sometimes it doesn't always go where I want to. Okay, before we learn that Sarah is beautiful, we learn that she is barren. Before we learn that Sarai is actually Abraham's half-sister, we learn she cannot have children. This is the beginning of the story. Abram and Sarai cannot have children. And God speaks to this when he calls them into his purpose, into his future. October 15 is National Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Day. So that's at the end of the year. Then we have to wait a whole few days until we get to May. The last full week of April, right before May, National Infertility Awareness Week. So here in America, we have different ways we are recognizing the fact that some families experience infertility and barrenness. Infertility is a disease or condition of the reproductive system, often diagnosed after a couple has had 1 year of unprotected, well-timed intercourse, or if the woman has suffered from multiple miscarriages and the woman is under 35 years of age. If the woman is over 35 years old, it is diagnosed after 6 months of unprotected, well-timed intercourse. The word miscarriage is never mentioned in Genesis, but we see family members getting anxious about wanting to have children, right? In fact, there's this famous story of Rebecca being concerned about what's happening inside of her womb, about these two twins that are fighting, and she's concerned about what's going to happen, their well-being. So it does not surprise me that there's a good chance, that they might have experienced some miscarriages along with their barrenness. In fact, we use the word infertility today. Back then, they would use the word barrenness, right? Back then, they would always attribute someone unwilling to a woman who's not able to have a baby as her fault, right? Whereas now we know through science that sometimes the male also contributes to that, right? It's not always pointing the finger at one. Currently, 1 in 8 couples have trouble getting pregnant or sustaining a pregnancy. And at this point in time, when the story is beginning, God is calling Abram and Sarai, and he is 75 and she is 65, so way over the 35-year mark. And you might say, well, they lived longer back then. And I'd say, okay, that's fine. But the story starts with this couple that's not able to have children, and that's the point of the narrative. So there's some compare and contrast between the ancient Near East when it comes to barrenness and infertility when it comes here to the more Western world. But the bottom line is infertility and barrenness can be painful and traumatic, especially when there's pressures from outside family members about needing to have children. You should be having children. Why are you not having children yet? And sometimes it's, look, we want to, but we can't. And my family has experienced that. We had to do IVF to get both of our children, and we are so lucky and grateful to be able to pursue that. In some ways, it's weird science fiction because both of my children were frozen as an embryo for months in the freezer before they were transferred, which is wild to me. In fact, both my, I don't know if they're watching tonight, both my children are in some ways the same age. One is 4, one is 8, but they were retrieved at the same time. So in years, I'm start telling you, actually, you're the same age. And so I'm excited about that. Okay. All right, so listen to God's call to Abraham and notice the two big themes. I tried to highlight them for you, bold, underlined, as well as italics. Here we go. Go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. And so you shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all of the families of the earth will be blessed. So the two big themes in the call of Abraham were the family and earth, right? So God is saying, I will bless you in this way. And this is not the first time that family and earth have come up in the book of Genesis. If you remember the fall of Adam and Eve, after Adam and Eve took the fruit, God comes and he walks in the garden, like, where are you? I'm like, why are you hiding? Did you eat from the fruit of the tree that I told you not to? So he speaks, and we're going to look at his conversation with Adam first. Cursed is the ground because of you. Notice how there's the ground. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. You shall eat the plants of the field, again looking at the ground. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you are taken. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return. And I don't believe that God is talking about how we might get a sore shoulder or a bad back or even blisters on our hands. God is talking about, in pain you shall eat of it, thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. So the real pain of working the ground to get food is not having a bad hip or a bad knee. The real pain is when you're trying to produce food and the ground does not produce that food, right? Instead, it's thorns and thistles. So we're thinking about famine now. The earth is not producing food. In pain, you shall eat of it. In fact, he talks to Eve before, and he says this. To the woman, he said, I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. In pain, you will bring forth children. Yet your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. This word childbirth here is not talking about the active giving birth. It's the full active giving birth. So conception, right? All the way to delivery. And I'm male, so I will never experience what it's like giving birth. So I need to be careful here and not mansplain this to y'all. But talking with my wife and other people, with modern miracles of science, we can get an epidural to help with what's going on with pain, right? But one of the deepest pains of trying to have children is when you're trying to produce children, but you're not able to produce those children, right? That can be very traumatic and very painful. It's not just the physical pain, it's the emotional and psychological pain that you're carrying with you. So God, here at the fall, is saying, here's what's going to happen now. Mother Earth will not be producing food like you want it to, and mothers will not be producing children like you want to. So these two themes actually are present in every single generation in Abraham's story. Across 4 generations, one of the big questions is, how is this family going to deal with famine, not having food? And also, how is this family going to deal with not having children when they want children? These are the two big drivers to the Abrahamic narrative, which is why when God calls Abraham, he speaks to those very same things that he talked to Adam and Eve about generations before. Here we go. So here's our first genogram. We see that Abram partnered with Sarai, his half-sister, and Nahor partnered with Milcah. So we're going to kind of reorient some people in this genogram so we can see who's partnered with whom. And back then, it was more normal to partner with someone who's part of your clan, part of your tribe, whereas now we think you should be not partnering with someone who's close to you biologically, but back then it was more expected we should be doing this. So here's where this story, after the call of Abraham, he calls Abram and Sarai to go, and they start here in Ur, so Mesopotamia. Raise your hand if you like when you're talking with someone, when they're texting, and you're trying to talk with them. Who enjoys that? No? No. If you don't like when someone's texting and you talk to them, you can blame the Mesopotamians, because they were the first people who created this written word, right? So if you don't like checking your emails, blame the Mesopotamians. You know that English phrase, I don't want to recreate the wheel? It's because they created it, right? In fact, they were so technologically advanced with all their irrigation systems, they were able to produce wheat and barley multiple times more than other surrounding areas, which means they had a surplus of goods to trade away which means this was a very wealthy cosmopolitan city. In fact, the city of Ur had running water through the city, as well as even certain homes in that city had specific running water. They had a sewage system. I'll show you a picture in a little bit. So a lot of things were going on for Ur, a very cosmopolitan city, wealthy situation. And when you have more wealth and time, you're able to create more artwork, like I showed you in like the second slide. So a lot of things were happening here in Ur. Very, very different than the left side, the wild, wild west of Canaan. Very, very different. So what happens in this story, we know that Abram and Sarai go up to Paddan, and then God calls them. And as this arrow is going up, notice up here in like near Nineveh, northern Mesopotamia, there are specific Assyrian tablets we're going to talk about recently. We'll talk about in a few minutes, called the Nuzi tablets. And the Nuzi tablets gave recommendations for what families should do when it came to family dynamics, how to handle certain situations in families. So it became kind of like a culturally accepted family norms. God calls Abram and Sarai, go down to the wild, wild west of Canaan. Here is the city of Ur. Archaeologists are looking at this sewage system. Notice how they're using these clay round cylinders, connecting them to one another so that the water can come down and then shoot out the side right here as a way to eliminate filth and waste in the city. So this tells us that this was not only a wealthy city with running water, it was also a very, very clean city, a place you would want to live, which is just different from the wild, wild west Bedouin-style lifestyle from Canaan. So their story was really their infertility story, and God is speaking into that. All right, who is Abram and Sarai's first son? Isaac. Okay, anyone else? Ishmael. Okay, Isaac or Ishmael. What if I told you they had a son before Isaac and Ishmael? What? How would we feel about that? Let's look at the story. The narrator goes through great lengths to tell us who their first son was. So Abram went forth as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. Now, Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Abram took Sarah his wife and Lot his nephew, and all their possessions they set out for the land of Canaan. So the narrator is saying, oh, Lot, this nephew, his father passed away. Nephew, Lot, is adopted part of this family. The word adoption never shows up in the book of Genesis, right? But we also know that they didn't have a foster care system, right? Instead, when caregivers passed away, the family would absorb and take care of that child. So Lot is the first adopted son. Let's keep looking. The narrator does not want us to miss this point. They get to Canaan. There's a famine in the land almost immediately, so they have to go down to Egypt. And Abram is worried about the prejudice and discrimination he's going to experience as a Mesopotamian way over in Egypt. He's worried about his well-being. And he says to his wife, can you please pretend that you're my sister, not my wife? Because he's concerned about how he's going to be treated, right? After Pharaoh finds out, because Sarai is taken into Pharaoh's harem, Pharaoh finds out about this, so he sends Abram and Sarah up north back to Canaan with lots of gifts. And so Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, he and his wife, and all that belonged to him, and Lot with him. Now Lot, who went with Abraham, also had flocks and herds and tents. So it's clear that Lot is part of this family now. So we're going to show this dotted line. So if anyone is adopted here, you can see this dotted line. So even though Lot is the biological son of Haran and his mother, he's adopted by Abram and Sarai. Maybe some of you are still not convinced. You're like, I don't know, Bryan. Does this really count as a son? And two things. One, even in today's culture here in the Western world, sometimes we see adopted children as not the same as biological children, right? But I want to say that adopted children can be loved and cared for in the exact same way that full biological children are. In fact, we know Abram loved Lot. Abram lets Lot choose first where to settle, right? There's some conflict between Lot's shepherds and Abram's shepherds, and Abram says, look, you choose the left or the right, where do you want to go? So Lot chooses the lush land of Sodom and Gomorrah. Abram rescues Lot. In chapter 14, there's the story of the 4 kings from the east from Mesopotamia come to Sodom and Gomorrah and say, you need to give us tribute, right? And they said, we're going to do that. And so the 4 kings with their professional armies take Sodom and Gomorrah captive and march them out. And as they're marching away, Abraham gets his posse together to chase after this professional army to rescue Lot. We also know that Abe at this time, Abram bargains with God for Lot's life, right? He's interested in preserving and saving Lot. Genesis 15, Abram's still saying, I am childless, so I still want my own biological child. And at this point in time, Sarai has this idea. How about we have Hagar help us with this infertility challenge, right? I'm not able to have children. Coming up from Egypt, we have these maidservants and manservants. How about we use one of them to help us with this infertility struggle? Who's heard this story before? Okay, a couple hands. Okay. So we know that it's Sarai's idea. Abram goes along with it. And then when Hagar gets pregnant, this is how you show someone is pregnant right here. Sarai starts to mistreat Hagar. So Hagar runs away, right? She runs away to try and preserve her life. God meets her, tells her to turn back. So the question here is, okay, is this story about polygamy? Is it about barrenness? Is it about unfaithfulness? Sometimes we give Sarai a hard time for this idea, as if she was being unfaithful and requesting that we use Hagar as a maidservant to help us overcome this infertility story. Have we heard this take before? That if she just trusted God, God would bless them, but she was trying to run ahead of God's plans, right? She believed that God helps those who help themselves, so she's trying to help herself through the situation. And I think sometimes we treat the story as if Sarai was the first person in the world to consider this idea. And we know that she wasn't, right? In fact, you see the later generations, Rebecca came with a nurse maidservant to help her. Why? Just in case she experiences infertility. Rachel and Leah also come with their maidservants, Bilhah and Zilpah. Why? To help them with cases of infertility. And it's not until now, at this point in the story, where Abraham and Sarah have a maidservant to help with this sort of thing. Does anyone know off the top of your heads, the 12 sons of Israel, does anyone know who the biological mothers are of all of those sons? How are we feeling about this? If I gave you a quiz and I'd say, I'll give you $50 if you get this correct, but you give me $50 if you're incorrect. If I asked you a specific name about any of those 12, like Issachar, would you feel pretty comfortable knowing who the biological mother was? Okay. So let's just notice, we make a really big distinction between the biological mother like Sarah versus Hagar, right? We have Ishmael, the son, we have Isaac, the son of promise, and we have Ishmael with Hagar, who's not quite as important. And for me, the big concern is not about whether or not Sarai decided to use a maidservant to help with her infertility. It's what happens later on in this story. So we'll come back to this in a few slides. But here are the Newsy tablets, these tablets I was talking about that give some cultural norms about how to behave in a family. And there were a few marriage and fertility laws that Abram and Sarah would have known about. One, a wife can give her slave girl as a surrogate to her husband to obtain offspring. So this was something that was widely practiced, all right? It wasn't just Sarai's idea. Two, the child is to be treated as her own. That's the expectation. And if they later on get a full biological child, the first child can't be expelled from the family. You can't kick out this child you received through surrogacy once you have a full biological child. And fathers are able to name any of their heirs, any of their sons as their heir, regardless of birth order. So these were expectations that parents had choices over these things. But we know in this story, number one, I guess the first arrow, Sarai is giving her slave girl, her surrogate, to her husband to obtain offspring. But does she treat Ishmael as her own? No. In fact, she's not even present at the birth of Ishmael. And then later on, she kicks out that child and Hagar. So here are the sons of Israel, and you can see who the mother of Issachar is Leah. So later on, if you want to make a distinction between who the biological mothers are of Leah, Bilhah, Zilpah, or Rachel, you can use this chart. All right, so we have Hagar running away from Sarah because she's pregnant and being mistreated, so she's running down to Egypt, right, running back home. God tells her to go back, And it's clear that Sarai wants nothing to do with Ishmael. She's not present at the birth of Hagar. So Hagar and Abram name him Ishmael. And I wonder if part of this, because Hagar was Egyptian, right? And Sarai was Mesopotamian. So I don't know if that played into the family dynamic, but it wouldn't be surprising. Plus, Hagar seems to get pregnant right away. Sarah has been dealing with barrenness for so long. So there are name changes, finally. Abraham and Sarah. Genesis 17 is more infertility. There's circumcision as well. Genesis 18, there's laughing at God. Sarah and Abraham are entertaining these three travelers, and she laughs because God says that Sarah will have a child, and she laughs because I'm so old. How's that going to actually happen? And then Abraham bargains with God. What if there's just 50, 45, 30, 20, maybe there's just 10 more people? Will you please not destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? Will you please do that? Why? He's wanting to preserve Lot. He's really interested in Lot. In fact, Abraham is not a morning person. Did you know this? There are only 3 times in the book of Genesis where Abraham gets up early. We're going to start with the last one, okay? I hear some other people might not be morning people either. Okay, so Genesis 22, verse 3, this is the story of the binding of Isaac, taking Isaac up to Mount Moriah to sacrifice him. So as the story is starting to project that direction. So notice how the narrator slows down the story, and the narrator uses 6 different verbs, all in the red, and he says, so Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son and split the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. The narrator slows down the movie so we can see this patriarch who is very, very wealthy. It could have other people do these tasks, these very menial tasks, but he wants to do them. This might be the last time he sees his son Isaac in camp. The second time Abraham gets up early. Notice the same sort of structure. Genesis 21, right before Ishmael is about to be sent off to the desert. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar, putting them on her shoulder, gave her the boy, and sent her away. This might be the last time he sees Ishmael in camp. The first time Abraham is willing to get up in the morning in the book of Genesis. Genesis 19, so Abraham arose early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord. This is where he bargained with God. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and he looked toward all the land of the valley, and he saw, behold, the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of the furnace. This could have been the last time that he saw Lot from camp. So it's clear he's willing to get up early for his 3 sons, Lot, Ishmael, and Isaac. Genesis 20, there's another famine in the land. So Abraham has to go with Sarah. This time they go, instead of going down to Egypt, they go over to the Philistines. And King Abimelech, he's worried about how he's going to be treated. Same sort of thing. Hey, can you please pretend, Sarah, that you are my sister, not my wife, right? And again, Sarah is taken to Abimelech's harem. Abimelech hears about it, and Abraham is worried about how he's going to be treated as an outsider. And then when Abimelech confronts Abraham, Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maids, so they bore children. So other people are also experiencing this infertility, right? And the king wants a harem so that he can have many children, right? That's what he's interested in. So this whole story is really about infertility. How do we get over infertility? How do we wrestle with infertility? For the Lord had closed fast all the wombs of the household of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. Everyone, even fringe characters, are interested in trying to find ways to have children. Even doing some things that are fairly questionable because they're trying to deal with this idea of progeny and how do we go down this road. So we know that Hagar and Ishmael are kicked out because finally Isaac comes, right? We find that Ishmael ends up teasing Isaac. And at this point in time, Sarah's had enough. Says, nope, we're going to kick them out. Kick these 2 people out. Kick out Ishmael, kick out Hagar, basically to go die in the desert, right? That's what she's thinking, get them out of my family. So there's this cutoff between Ishmael and Isaac, and the tension between Sarah and Hagar, the tension between Ishmael and Isaac. Does the tension between these 2 family members suddenly disappear? No. We can still experience the tension between the descendants of Ishmael and descendants of Isaac today, right? On our big geopolitical frame, right? The tension does not disappear. So when you kick someone out of the family, it does not mean the tension disappears with them. All right. Oops. So for me, what's a greater issue? Having Hagar serve as a surrogate, which was culturally acceptable, way to get around barrenness, versus not embracing Ishmael into the family, right? Because if Sarah was able to welcome Ishmael into the family and not kick Ishmael out of the family, the tension between Ishmael and Isaac would not be present today. That's what I'm more concerned about. When families aren't able to deal with conflict and tension, and we just kick family members out and don't actually deal with that tension, that unresolved tension gets passed down from generation to generation. So I just don't want to single out Sarah as if she's the only one who thought of this, because Abraham went along with it, and just like Adam was right there next to Eve, they both participated in this. And instead, if they were able to resolve their tension, then there wouldn't be potentially as much tension passed down from generation to generation. In fact, you'll see in the later generations, there's tension between the siblings in every generation, right? We learn this. This is how we make our chocolate chip cookie. So then I'm going to use the same recipe for future generations, and this is just what's expected. And we know the tension between the siblings didn't just begin here in Abraham. We know there were tension between Cain and Abel as well, right? So this tension between siblings, this inability to resolve conflict, you end up passing this unresolved tension down from generation to generation. After Genesis 22, which is the binding of Isaac, there's this little narrator interlude where the narrator lists a whole bunch of other people in a family tree as well as this person named Rebecca. There's this new matriarch coming along. I want to alert you to who this Rebecca is, and then we'll move on with the story. So here's our genogram up in Genesis 22. We've already done the left side, but here's the right-hand side, including Laban and Rebecca. We know Rebecca is going to eventually partner with Isaac. At Genesis 23, Sarah passes away at age 127, and Abraham mourns. But something is interesting about this story, what's happening in Genesis 23. Because the flow of the text is Genesis 22, Abraham comes down from Mount Moriah. Near the end of 22, there's this Rebecca person back at the ranch of Paddan. And now we go to Genesis 23, and it says, now Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. Sarah died in Kiriath Arba, that's Hebron. So she died in Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham came in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. This word in, just like prepositions we can use, if I'm on top of it, means I got it. I'm on top of the car, right? So am I literally on top of the car, or I'm on top of my work? That word on can be used in different ways. This word in can also be translated as go up to. I'm going into this, I'm going into the cave, I'm going up into the attic. So the question is Abraham coming in to mourn for Sarah and weep for her, or is he coming up to mourn for her? This is interesting because when Abraham comes down from Genesis 22, Abraham lived in Beersheba. Genesis 23, Sarah died in Kiriath Arba. So what's happening when Abraham is in Beersheba, but Sarah passed away? Oh, Kiriath Arba. There we go. Let's look at the geographic distance between these two. So here's Hebron, here's Beersheba. Now, one explanation is, well, they were living a Bedouin lifestyle with their flocks. They're moving around to make sure their flocks always have food, right? That's one explanation. But this is quite a bit of a distance, 26.4 miles. And to give you a sense of what this is, on the right-hand side, here's Beersheba and Hebron. And then here we are, Westminster SDA Church, and then here's Baltimore. So why is it one person is, Abraham is in Baltimore, but Sarah passed away at Westminster SDA? Why is there so much distance? And here's what I'm wondering. I know that they used to live in Ur, this cosmopolitan city with running water, a sewage system, artwork, an abundance of resources. And they go to Paddan, and then God calls them to wild west of Canaan, which is a very different sort of lifestyle. Twice, Abraham has said, hey, I want to preserve my own skin. Can you please pretend to be my sister, not my wife? And both times, Sarah was taken into Pharaoh's harem and then Abimelech's harem. Also, there's no mention of conversation between Abraham and Sarah about bringing Isaac, her full biological son, up to Mount Moriah to sacrifice him. So I'm wondering if there is any tension between these two, and this is indicative of the geographic distance between Hebron and Beersheba. Genesis 24, after Sarah passed away, Abraham says, look, we need to find a partner for Isaac. So asks his trusted servant, can you please go back to Paddan to find a wife for my son? So the trusted servant goes up, and he brings back Rebekah. Isaac had brought her, Rebekah, into his mother Sarah's tent, so it's clear that he still has some sort of connection with Sarah. And he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. Thus Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. So in some ways, bringing a new matriarch into the family was a way to help Isaac deal with his grief. Abraham takes another wife, has 6 more offspring, sends these kids east, away from Isaac, so Isaac can be in Canaan by himself. He wants him a lot of space. And Isaac is often seen as this supportive character and not as big of a character compared to Abraham and Jacob, right? In some ways, Isaac is sandwiched in between them. And so some of the questions in the commentaries and things I've heard at church, during sermons, during Sabbath school is, what's going on with Isaac? Is he weak? Is he passive? He never leaves the reason, right? He seems more like a supporting character. So what's going on with Isaac? In fact, as soon as we get to Isaac, Isaac only has 1 chapter to himself, and we soon get to the twins, Esau and Jacob, and the narrator goes on with the twins and kind of leaves Isaac behind. So I want to take a moment to spend some time with Isaac so we can have some time in the spotlight. These are 3 Hollywood actors, and they are all working out. Okay, left-hand side, we have Mark Wahlberg. I think someone Mackie, is that right in the middle? Anthony, thank you. I knew someone who would know. And then Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And look at their shoulders. They know the inside of a weight room. Look at that. In fact, if they were walking towards me, I would walk to the other side of the street so they don't, take my lunch money, right? But let's look how big they look next to actually big people. On the right-hand side, we have Shaquille O'Neal. And on the left-hand side, we have Charles Barkley. And look how small they look, right? Mark Wahlberg looks like he came to borrow some quarters from his dad, right? And Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson with the Miami looks like he's wanted to borrow his dad's keys for the car. They look so small here, right? Right? Here's another person. I'm a Seahawks fan. So before DK Metcalf was traded to the Steelers, look at him. He's 6'4", 220, 3% fat, 1,000% muscle. He's a big NFL wide receiver. But look how small he looks next to Dikembe Mutombo. No. He looks like he came to borrow, a couple dollars to go buy a soda at 7-Eleven from his dad. He looks small, right? Who we stand next to in our family changes the way people see us. And Isaac is standing here. He's next to his big dad, Abraham, right? Then Isaac is here, almost like just a stepping stone to get to Jacob/Israel. We often gloss over Isaac. Let's just kind of take a moment to see who Isaac was and what he did, how he contributes to the story as a person. So Genesis 26, Isaac lies. Why? Because there's a famine in the land. And when there's a famine in the land, he has to go find a place to find food. So he goes to the Philistines, the new king Abimelech, and he uses the same exact playbook that his father used. He says to Rebekah, can you please pretend like you're my sister, not my wife, right? And so, but it's found out because they are caught canoodling, and the king Abimelech says, oh, why did you lie to me, et cetera, et cetera. We know that Isaac digs wells, so more like the city folk, and he grows wheat as well, and we know he has these flocks, which tells us Isaac can live the city life, and he can live the nomad life, or the pastoral life. So he's able to do both. He's a flexitarian when it comes to this sort of thing. He can manage both of these things. He also experienced prejudice and discrimination, right? In fact, after his dad passed away, the people of the region wanted to kick him out because he was growing so big. They were trying to get rid of him. So they were stealing wells from him to get him out of town. They did not want him around. Genesis 25, Abraham dies. These are the years of Ishmael, 137 years, and he breathed his last and he died. He was gathered to his people. They settled from Hilva, Shur, which is east of Egypt. One goes to Syria, settled in defiance of all of his relatives. So we know that Ishmael lives in defiance of his relatives, and Ishmael is not the only person in the family that is defiant. We'll see this later on. There's this infertility. In fact, Isaac is the only person to pray to God on behalf of his wife when it comes to barrenness. Other patriarchs complain to God, But Isaac is the only patriarch who prays to God, used the word pray to God on behalf of his wife because she was barren. The Lord heard his prayer, and his wife Rebekah conceived. But the children inside her struggled with each other, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So Rebekah went in to inquire of the Lord, and he declared to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two people from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other. The older will serve the younger." And if you have your smartphones out, if you want to, this next slide has this little QR code if you want to see a picture of two babies moving in utero and how it might potentially feel. Imagine this is what's happening to Rebekah as she's concerned about having children. It's two babies kind of moving together. I'll give you a moment to do that while I get some water. Oh. Yep. All right, so here we are at your genogram. Whew, catching up. So we have Esau and Jacob. They're twins. They're coming from the same part, so we can kind of see what's going on with this family tree, all right? We know that Rebekah preferred Jacob, right? And Isaac preferred Esau. There are strong preferences in this family about who was the preferred child. When her time came to give birth, there were two twins in her room. The first one came out red, covered with hair like a fur coat. So they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out grasping Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob, and Isaac was 60 years old when the twins were born. When the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter. Ishmael, Isaac's half-brother, was also a skillful hunter. So I wonder if there was something here, seeing as Isaac has this child, Esau, and sees that he's a skillful hunter. I wonder if he's like, oh, my half-brother's also a skillful hunter, and I didn't get a chance to really connect with him because our family was separated. Well, Jacob was a quiet man who stayed at home because Isaac had a taste for wild game. He loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And I sometimes wonder what it would be like to be, I wouldn't want to provide therapy for this family, but I wonder what it would be like to be on the inside to figure out how this family deals with stuff. There's this famous story where Esau comes in from the hunt, and he's famished, and he wants some food. And Jacob says, well, you have to give me your birthright in order to have some food. And we often see Ishmael as being someone who is not forward-thinking, is not aware of resources, is like this lummox who goes around hunting things and doesn't really think very well for himself. Because Jacob says to him, swear to me first, Jacob said. So Esau swore to Jacob and sold him the birthright. Then Jacob gave him some bread and lentil stew to Esau, who ate and drank, and then got up and went away. Thus Esau despised his birthright. We often see this story as a critique on Esau. But I think this story is actually more of a critique on Jacob than it is Esau. Here's why. Back then, if you were traveling around, you had to rely on the hospitality of other people, right? There wasn't a Burger King or Taco Bell every corner. So you had to rely on the hospitality of other people when you were traveling. That's the first thing. Second thing, back then, if you were making food, you're not making a single-serving cup of noodle soup, right? You're making a big old pot of lentil stew. So imagine Jacob is pulling out a big pan of lasagna, boom, and everybody in camp is eating, or they already ate, or they're about to eat, and I'm guessing he did not charge anyone else in camp that same price for some food. When maybe Esau, if he's part of this family, he has a right to this food, all right? So what's happening here? Jacob is taking advantage of his brother, taking advantage of the situation, trying to get the birthright. So the next slide is going to show you what that birthright is, what it is he's getting in exchange for a little garlic bread and some lasagna. So on the left-hand side, we have 10 children. The firstborn son, which is the big blue pie piece, gets his birthright. Then he gets 1/10 of what's left because there's 10 children. So all the other children split up the rest of the inheritance. On the right-hand side, we have 2 children. We have the firstborn son, which would be Esau, only born a few minutes before Jacob, right? In some ways, the luck of the draw. There's a chance that Jacob could have been born first, but in this case, it's Esau, who gets his birthright, which happens to be 1/3 of Dad's inheritance. Then everything else is split up between the 2 brothers. So essentially, Esau gets 2/3 of Dad's inheritance, and Jacob only gets 1/3. So Jacob is saying, I'll give you some soup and bread, but you have to give me your third of the inheritance, right? So if Jacob is willing to do this to his own flesh and blood, this tells us a little bit about who Jacob is and what he's trying to get for himself. It seems like he's looking out for himself, for number one. Jacob's deception, he deceives his father Isaac, and when we read Genesis 27, there's all these questions that Isaac has, like, are you really the son that you say you are? Come close to me. You say you're Esau, but you sound like Jacob. So he brings him close so he can smell him and touch him. So there's this whole Halloween costume that Jacob puts on to trick his father, right? So that he can also get the blessing. Because if he can get the birthright and the blessing for all intents and purposes, he ends up being the firstborn son of the family, right? He'll have 2/3 of the inheritance as well as the blessing. And this blessing includes this idea of fertility to pass on your family from generation to generation. Move on here. So here we are, Genesis 28. Jacob runs away. Esau marries again. He marries someone else. So previously Esau married 2 other people. He marries a third person, an Ishmaelite. Jacob runs away to his uncle Laban because, in fact, Rebekah recommends that he go run away to try and find an approved wife, then come back to the family. So Jacob runs back up. He finds a wife, sleeps on a stone. At first, he's intending to marry Rachel because that was his plan, right? That was the agreement he had with his uncle Laban. I'm going to marry Rachel, right? But then he's tricked into marrying Leah, and then he realizes he still gets to marry Rachel, so he's excited about that. So people taking advantage of other people in the family is not uncommon. We see it in several generations. In fact, he works 7 years for Rachel, right? He gets tricked. He marries Leah. He complains to his uncle Laban about it, and Laban says, okay, just give her this 1 week, then I'll let you marry Rachel. So he marries Leah. There's 1 bridal week. Then he marries Rachel. Then he works 7 more years. So he marries 2 wives within 8 days. So how many years did he work for Rachel? 14. How many years did he work for Leah? None. He wasn't working for Leah. So Leah knows this, right? Leah knows this. She knows she is the non-preferred wife, right? In fact, this was Laban pulling the strings behind this to get Leah married, where Jacob wasn't looking at Leah. He's willing to work 7 years and 7 more years, doubling down to marry Rachel. So you can bet that played into the dynamic within this marital system. We'll talk about that a little bit. This family uses the same sort of lies, the same sort of playbook. So Abraham lies to Pharaoh. This is after the first famine, saying, "Oh, this is my sibling, my wife, but she's my sibling." Why? To save his own skin. The next famine, same sort of thing. He lies to King Abimelech. "Oh, this is my sibling." Why? To save his own skin. If it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. And next famine coming along for Isaac. Isaac lies to the next King Abimelech, saying, "Oh, me too. This is my sister, not my wife." Why? To save his own skin, right? Later on, Jacob, prompted by Rebekah, lies to Isaac, saying, "I am my sibling," right? And here is his skin. You can touch this hairy skin, right? Later on, Leah, prompted by Laban, lies to Jacob, says, "Oh, me too, I am my sibling. I'm Rachel," right? And here's my skin. So this family, who siblings are and who you are in relation to your siblings, is something that's very, very important. They're using the same sort of lies, the same family lying playbook. But God did bless tender-eyed Leah. She had several sons, and you can see the name of these sons. I'm not going to spend too much time here. The name of these sons are speaking to her experience. The first few are about how she cannot get her husband's attention, right? Jacob's not paying her the same sort of attention that she wants. She thinks, if I'll be able to have children, then finally Jacob will love me. And then she realized by the time it comes to Judah, this time I'll praise the Lord, because she knows she's starting to realize that maybe her partner is not accepting her. So the next children afterward are all about her relationship to God instead of her relation to her husband. Genesis 30, I call this infertility wars. Mandrakes and Jacob prospers. So now in the days of the wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. So we have the eldest son of Leah going into the field, finding mandrakes, bringing those back to her. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, that's Leah said to Rachel, "Is it a small matter for you to take my husband? And would you take my son's mandrakes also?" So Rachel said, "Therefore he may lie with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes." So what's a mandrake? Anyone know? It's a plant, yeah, because it's in the field. That was good. Yeah. Luckily, I did a little bit of work, so the next slide will show you some mandrakes. Here we go. The top is what's above ground, but look at the roots down below. The roots are very anthropomorphic. Do we see that? There are many cultures who see mandrakes as having these special powers, amulet-type powers. In fact, these could be worn around your neck as an amulet to bring you good luck or to ward away evil spirits, right? But these mandrakes also have specific properties. Is there anyone who happens to be like a nurse practitioner or a psychiatrist in here? Okay, I'm going to do my best. I'm neither of those, right? But I can read words off a screen. So these mandrakes have specific properties. They're seen as aphrodisiacs, and they can be cut up and used in tea, and they are deliriant, hallucinogenic, tropane alkaloids. These have drug-type properties. So what's happening is Reuben goes to the field, finds these mandrakes, which could be used to bring good luck, or could be used as an aphrodisiac, or to hallucinogenic properties, and Rachel's saying, "Oh, I want those infertility drugs." And Leah's saying, "Yeah, but I want access to my husband." So Rachel says, "Okay, you can lie with husband for one night in exchange for the mandrakes." So Rachel is selling her husband for infertility drugs, right? There's this exchange happening because they're so interested in having access to a partner or having access to children. There's this Pashto proverb saying, "I was swift in my revenge, I only waited 100 years." This is important because we've been following Jacob all this time and Padamaran and his 2 wives trying to have children. But Jacob is going to run away from Laban, right, and come back to Esau. And the last thing we heard from Esau said, "I'm going to kill my brother." So how is Esau going to receive Jacob when he comes home? Genesis 31 through 34. Jacob runs away from his family towards Canaan, and he takes these family idols from Laban. And Laban actually gets on his horse and chases after them and stops them and says, "Whoa, somebody stole these family idols. Somebody stole these teraphim, and we think you did it," right? This is important because these teraphim, these idols, were actually the deed to the family inheritance. So what's happening is Jacob, along with Leah and Rachel, because Leah and Rachel do not like how Laban's been treating them, stole these family idols and are taking them down to Canaan. And so Laban runs after them, wants to search for all these things, these family idols, and Jacob says, "You can search anywhere you want. We don't have them." And what's happening is Rachel is inside of her tent on top of a saddle of a camel, and sitting down. And so when Laban comes in to search the tent for these idols, she says, "You can't come in. I'm menstruating, my time of the month." So he goes on and looks at other places. But he still doesn't trust them. What's happening is, after he finds out that nobody has these idols, he can't find them, he says, "All right, let's put up this boundary stone, this Mizpah, saying, look, you cannot cross this boundary again, because you said you don't have the idols, but I don't trust you. So here's a boundary stone. When you leave this family, you leave this family. I never want you crossing this boundary stone ever again." So he's making sure he never sees his daughters and his son-in-law ever again. He wants them out of the family. Genesis 32, Jacob is afraid of Esau's 400 people. He wrestles with God. God names him Israel. Israel actually reunites with Esau. And Genesis 33 has some strong echoes to Luke 15, if you want to read that story. Genesis 31 through 34, Dinah, Leah and Jacob's daughter, was sexually assaulted by the priest of Shechem. And Levi and Simeon get revenge upon Shechem. What happens is the prince of Shechem comes out, says, "I want to marry Dinah." And the brothers say, okay, we'll let you marry her, because right now she's actually still held hostage in Shechem. She's not allowed out. The prince is coming out to negotiate. And the brothers say, okay, you can do that as long as everybody in Shechem gets circumcised. They all get circumcised, and then Levi and Simeon use weapons, and they go and kill everybody in Shechem. And Jacob's really worried about this. Jacob's really upset. He didn't do anything. He's not doing this stuff, but he's worried about what's going on. Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have brought trouble upon me by making me a stench to the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the people of this land. We are few in number, and if they unite against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed. So he's worried about his own well-being, but his brothers say, should you have treated our sister like a prostitute? So what's happening in the story, the sons are sticking up to protect other people in the family more than the father is. So what is Jacob/Israel about now? In fact, in Genesis 35, we find Jacob takes and buries these family idols. We know that Rachel dies as Benjamin is born. Reuben sleeps with Bilhah. Reuben is sleeping with Rachel's concubine, Bilhah, as a way to show that his father won't do anything against him. Jacob is renamed Israel a second time. Like, why can't you handle your family? Why can't you get your stuff together? Jacob sees his father Isaac again, but he never gets to see Rebekah. So after Rebekah had this plan to try and get her favorite firstborn son to be the person who receives the birthright and the blessing and send him off to get a wife, she never actually gets to see him again. Genesis 36, there's more Esau's descendants. So we have this expanded genogram here, and there's this story of all these 12 sons. Up to this point in time, we've only had 2 sons per family. Now we suddenly have 12 sons, and there's a lot of distance between Joseph and his brothers. Joseph was treated very differently from his brothers, right? He had special clothing that his father gave to him. So Joseph is different in several ways. In fact, so much so that his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. So if we were having a Thanksgiving meal, they would not ask Joseph to pass the gravy. They'd ask somebody else to get the gravy to pass to him, because they do not want you to be able to speak with him on friendly terms. And here's why. Joseph is a tattletale. He brought a bad report of his brothers to their father, so they don't like that. He is clearly Israel's favorite. He got that special coat, right? He is the son of Israel's preferred wife, strongly preferred wife, right? Worked 14 years for Rachel, worked 0 years for Leah. He is gifted this coat of many colors. He's not assigned the same labor responsibilities as his brothers. In fact, you remember the story where he gets caught by his brothers, and his brothers throw him into a well and tear his coat. It's because he's chilling at home watching TV, and his father gave him managerial responsibilities. Can you go please check on your brothers, see how they're doing? So he's not out in the field with them. He's at home in the shade under the tents. He has these dreams about family brothers bowing down to him, and he shares these dreams twice. So at this point in time, he is difficult to get along with. He's not using his power and privilege to help other people get access to resources or the same sort of support. He has this special coat. He's the preferred son with these different labor responsibilities. So the rest of the brothers are having a difficult time getting along with him. So they have this sweet idea of how about we take him, throw him into this pit, right? Then we'll take this beloved coat, put some goat blood on it, take the coat back to his dad and say, hey, this is what we found. So the dad, Father Israel, assumes this means my son has died. A wild beast has taken him. And the father tears his clothes, right, in anguish, in grief. And these brothers are just living in this narrative that somebody killed this favorite brother, but in fact, they actually sold him for a profit, right, to some family members who were going down to Egypt. So they sold him away as a slave. Genesis 38, there's this interlude about Judah and Tamar. Genesis 39, Joseph prospers in Egypt, then he's in prison. And then Genesis 40, the dreamer becomes the interpreter. He helps to interpret the king's dream. Joseph becomes the second most important person in Egypt, the viceroy of Egypt. He stores food during 7 years of plenty to prepare for 7 years of famine. And all of a sudden, the famine comes, and the children of Israel are experiencing the famine. So they come down to Egypt to get some food. And Joseph seems to have this prescient knowledge about this family. He has all these questions about these brothers because the brothers do not recognize him. but he recognizes them, right? So he looks different, he's acting different, maybe he's wearing Egyptian garb, so he looks very different from his brothers from the last time they saw him. So he has this prescient knowledge. He says, you are all spies. He imprisons all of them. And then he said, well, maybe you're not spies, but I'm going to keep Simeon, and if you ever come back, make sure to bring this youngest brother, Benjamin, that you talk about. He doesn't actually say Benjamin, he just talked about the youngest brother. So he sends them away, and as they're going back to Canaan with food, they look in their sacks, and they realize all the money they brought to buy food, it's back in their sacks. So if they're not spies, they're thieves, right? They go up, but it's a 7-year famine. They're going to run out of food. So the brothers have to talk with Israel, hey, we needed more food, but we have to bring Benjamin because we promised there was this other brother, Benjamin, and the viceroy of Egypt was really, really interested in this person. So we have to bring him along, right? Joseph, when they come down second time, he seats them in birth order, and he gives Benjamin 5 times the amount of food, right? So he treats Benjamin very differently in front of all the brothers, right? And then he sends the brothers home, and on their way home, he tells a servant to run after them to stop the party and stop the caravan and say, look, somebody stole the viceroy's divination cup, and we think it's you, because you might be spies or thieves, or both. And all the brothers say, you can look anywhere you want. Look in our packs. We didn't steal it. So the servant opens all of the packs. Lo and behold, they get to Benjamin's pack. They open it up, and there it is, the divination cup. And this would have been a sweet time in the narrative for all the brothers to say, oops, I guess Benjamin is taken as well. You can take Benjamin, we don't need him. Because he's the last surviving son of Rachel, the preferred wife of our father. Instead, these brothers tear their clothes in anguish. We've been waiting several chapters for this to happen, right? They tore Joseph's cloak, Israel tore his clothes, and now these brothers finally tear their clothes, saying, no, you are not taking our brother Benjamin away from us. We are all going with him. So there's some solidarity happening within this family now. So I think it's happening, goes to goosebumps. Joseph is testing the family system. What happens when there's a son from the preferred wife that is treated much better than everyone else, giving him 5 times the amount of food? How do the brothers treat him? Because back when I was there, they sold me into slavery. So is the same thing happening now? And it's clear that it is not. Something has shifted within that family system. Now the brothers are wanting to stick up for the last son of Rachel. Before, they wanted to get rid of the first son of Rachel. So Joseph is testing to see what's going on in this family. All right. Whew. Let's get back to these questions. What are some of Abraham's family rules? What are the intergenerational patterns of behavior? How do people handle anxiety and tension in this family? Who are the villains? Who are the heroes? We're going to use this genogram to track all these behaviors. Here we go. First, defiance. In every single generation, there's at least one person to show defiance. Hagar, defiance, I'm running away to Egypt, right? Ishmael, living in defiance of all of his family members. Esau, doing things in defiance. In fact, he was marrying Judas and Basemath, which were people that his mom and dad did not approve of. And then we have the sons of Leah also being in defiance, right? So every generation, there's some defiance. Lying. In every generation, people are willing to bend the truth in this family. Every generation. And notice, some of those who were defiant, like Hagar, Ishmael, and Esau, weren't doing the lying. It was some other people. Conflict. In every generation, there's conflict. Indicated by the jagged red line. A lot of conflict. And oftentimes they are lying to avoid conflict. They're trying to use the way to get around conflict. Each generation there's favoritism towards the youngest offspring. Every generation there's some extreme manipulation happening. People are trying to get what they want. sometimes at the expense of other people. Every generation, there's some sort of adoption happening. Lot, Benjamin in some ways was adopted because his mom passed away, so now he's brought into the rest of the family. Ephraim and Manasseh, we'll talk about that later. In some ways, Abraham was adopted into God's family, so there's adoption happening in each generation. In each generation, people are cut off from the family. Either they self-select, they run away, or they are kicked out. So we have Hagar running away from Sarah. God sends her back. And then kicked out by Sarah, both her and Ishmael. We know that Jacob runs away from Esau to Laban, and then he and Rachel and Leah run from Laban back to Esau. Then, of course, selling Joseph into slavery. So in each generation, this family is using kicking people out as a way to resolve the tension they experience. There's this unrepaired rift between the descendants of Ishmael and the descendants of Isaac that is never resolved. So who are the villains and who are the heroes? How do we feel about this family? Say it again? Okay. Can anyone identify with some of the stuff we see up there? Yeah. Let's notice, heroes don't always come from perfect families, right? And God is not scared away by our dysfunction. In each generation, God is wanting to remake his covenant with people. So our difficulty getting along with other people does not get in the way of God wanting to be interested in us. So who are any villains? You notice any villains in the story? What do you say? Most all of them. Okay, what do you say?
Yeah, the same thing.
There are so many villains, right? So let's notice, just because you do some things that are questionable, villain-like, doesn't mean you can't also have some positive qualities. So let's not mark someone off just because they have certain characteristics, when there might be other characteristics that we can also notice and benefit and enjoy and see how they are contributing to society. But it's really easy to write people off as just a villain. I mean, Laban's a villain, right? It's often we see the brothers of Joseph as villains, right? How dare they treat their brother this way, right? How dare they trick their father, which is done in previous generations? How dare they take advantage of their brother, like it's been done in previous generations? How dare they try and do things that advantage themselves instead of someone else, which has been done in previous generations? So in some ways, these brothers of Joseph were really good at following family rules, right? They were using the playbook they were handed. They were doing what previous generations did in this great magnum opus to not only get rid of their brother, but turn a profit. So they were really good family members in some sense, but really bad brothers in other sense. So just because you're following a family rule doesn't mean it's the best family rule. How about heroes? Any heroes? Depends on the situation. Depends on the perspective, right? Who are you talking to? At what point in their life, right? Rarely is a hero their whole life, right? Joseph's brothers, who just a few chapters before tried to get rid of their brother, now they're trying to save their brother. Look at this turn. People can change. People can move. If they decide to do this, right? I'll get some goosebumps. It takes insight to recognize what are these patterns that I'm currently following. Is there an opportunity for me to change and choose new pathways? Joseph is also sometimes seen as a hero, but he got away from the family system a little bit, right? He got a little bit of space to make some changes, and now we have Joseph who's interested in using his power and privilege to take care of the surrounding regions by gathering food for 7 years to supply food for the 7 years of famine. He's using his position of power to help other people, whereas before in his family, his brothers hated him because he was not using his position to help other people. And they couldn't even speak to him on friendly terms. Yeah, and from whose perspective? Because whoever you talk to in the family, they might have a different story about who the heroes and villains are. In fact, the very first thing I showed you, the genogram with Dahlia, if someone else created that genogram, they might have a different perspective from the rest of the family members. Because even though we grew up in the same family, doesn't mean we grow up in the same family, all right? Because who you're standing next to, who who you're getting along with or not getting along with shapes the way you experience your family. And that's okay to have differences, but let's just notice that. So every generation there's conflict in the marital unit. In every generation, the younger son ends up receiving the blessing. In every generation, there's conflict between the siblings. And when the main family rule seems to be, do whatever is expedient to help you now. Let's not worry as much about the consequences. And raise your hand if you'd like to have this family over for Thanksgiving. So let's notice that they experience challenges, but our families might also parallel some of this, right? We might experience some tension and cutoff in our families, right? Conflict, defiance, lying, manipulation. So this is not unique to them. Most of us resonate with some of that as well. Whatever we refuse to acknowledge, we will undoubtedly and unconsciously pass on to others. And the Genogram is a great tool for us to notice what are our own family patterns that we are unknowingly continuing to replicate, and is there an opportunity to change some of these patterns? Abraham versus Jacob when it comes to life satisfaction. Genesis 25, verse 7. These are all the years of Abraham's life that he lived, 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age, an old man satisfied with life, and he was gathered to his people. That's Abraham. Let's look at Isaac. Genesis 35, 28. Now the days of Isaac were 180 years, so 5 years more. Then Isaac breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people, an old man of ripe age. And what's missing here? Missing satisfied with life. Let's go to the next generation with Jacob. 47. Jacob's talking with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's asking about his life, and he says, the years of my living abroad are 130. Few and unpleasant have been the years of my life. There's been a change in life satisfaction as you go down the generation. And this is what happens when we pass on unresolved tension and anxiety to each generation. In fact, some of the stress and anxiety we deal with did not originate with us. That's been passed down through the generations. In fact, you can track this all the way back up to Adam and Eve, right? When you pass on unresolved tension, the next generation has their own stuff to deal with as well as the old stuff. And the next generation has their new stuff plus all the old stuff. And that's what we see happening here, and it's affecting their life satisfaction just in 1, 2, 3 generations. It will take every triggered nerve, every tremble in your voice, every butterfly in your belly, and every rejoicing ancestor for you to say, no, I'm not doing this anymore. So if you happen to know there's a particular pattern in your family that has been practiced, honed, perfected, but it doesn't mean you have to keep doing it. You can make some changes if you want to. Genesis 48, there's this experience where Jacob comes and he wants to talk with Joseph, and he wants to bless Joseph's sons. And he says, he's recounting to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, blessed me, and he said to me, behold, I will make you fruitful and numerous, and I'll make you a multitude of peoples, and I will give this land to your descendants. Again, hearkening back to God's call to Abraham, families and land, right? For you as everlasting possession. Now your 2 sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to Egypt, I thought you were dead. Those 2 sons are mine. I'm adopting them. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are. So what's happening here? Israel is saying, your 2 sons are mine, just like my other sons are. So in essence, what he's doing is, remember those fertility wars between Leah and Rachel? He's adopting these 2 sons from Joseph, which are really under the line of Rachel, right? So in some ways, Rachel now has 4 sons to her name. So he's doing this recognizing that Rachel passed away before she was able to bear him more sons. And he wants to bless these sons. He says, I never expected to see your face, and behold, God has let me see your children as well. I want to bless them. So Joseph puts his sons in front of his father. So all his father has to do is stick out his hands like this to bless them. So Joseph does all the hard work, and instead, Israel ends up crossing his hands to bless these sons. And Joseph is upset about this. Finally, we see Joseph upset. Up to this point in time, we haven't seen Joseph upset. Now he's upset. And Joseph saw his father place his right hand on Ephraim's head. It displeased him. And he grasped his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Dad, you're doing it wrong. Let me show you, right? So Joseph said to his father, "Not so, my father, you made a big mistake. For this one is the first round. Just put your hand out. Place your right hand on his head. It's not that hard, Dad." As if this occurred in prior generations. But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He also will become a people, and he will also be great. However, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations." So, people are doing this intentionally, right? And in some ways, we can't go back in time, right? But I'm thinking about Jacob, thinking about his tension with his brother Esau. If instead of tricking his father out of the blessing, God had already told Rebekah that the older will serve the younger, right? But I wonder what would have happened if in this family, Esau came back with some food, cooked it the way his father liked it, and Jacob's father, Isaac, says, "Bring in Jacob as well." So Jacob and Esau are there. Instead, just crosses his hands and blesses the younger one instead of the older one. There would not have been this big split in the family, right? Jacob would not have had to run away. He could live with his preferred mother. But instead, this family really likes to take advantage of other people. And I wonder if Israel is thinking about this. All right. Closing theological reflections, then time for questions. If we can get a roaming mic, potentially. All right. First, God chose to make and remake his covenant with imperfect people. God knows we are not perfect, right? 2, people started to work really, really hard, even taking advantage of others to obtain or protect God's already promised blessings. Yet sometimes they even seem to put that promise in jeopardy. If you think about Jacob running away from the promised land of Canaan up to Paddan to get a wife, and it was unclear whether or not he was actually going to return. So people are running away from the place where God has put them. God works even harder not to let our dysfunction ruin his covenant with us. It is righteousness by faith for a reason, right? Fierce covenantal loyalty is in contrast with the family loyalty, because this family is not always very loyal to each other, but God has always been loyal to them. Sometimes the action of one person can change a family tree. In fact, if you want to make changes for future generations, you make the changes in yourself so the next generation has space to make different changes. Because when you step away from the dysfunction, you do not have to continue to pass those behavior patterns along. All right, so here's what I want to know. What stuff do you notice in Abraham's family that I missed, right? I also want to know, how might this change the way you see Abraham's family, or how might this change the way you see your family or your romantic relationships? So what did I miss? How might this change the way you see Abraham's family? How could this change the way you see your family or your romantic relationships?
Does anybody want to make a comment? Harold? Okay.
This helps me out because as you're looking at, I mean, it's Jerry Springer. Looking at all these people, and you're just sitting there going, the Lord loved these guys through all this.
Yeah.
And, not that I'm trying to compare me with them, but it gives me hope.
I'm pulling this out to make notes. Wherever I present, I like to make little notes. Jerry Springer is a new one for me. Yeah, agreed. Thank you.
Well, I never really looked at Joseph as being haughty and holding it over his brothers, but now I can see more that, he he probably did have the era of I am better than you, and he's probably a teenager.
Probably teenager.
Through all this, and so automatically thinking things that he shouldn't anyways about his family. So I think that was a really interesting perspective for me, because I've always just felt so bad for Joseph.
Yeah.
And everything that he went through. But he was probably a snotty brat.
I don't know. His
And-
brothers couldn't get along with him. I don't know
Right.
if he was snotty, but his rest of his siblings could not get along with him. So, like, if it's just one sibling you can't get along with, okay. If it's two, okay. But, like, 10 other siblings?
Right.
Like, okay, what's the common denominator here, right?
Yep, and you see that in families. And I only have one sister, so I never really understand that stuff
Mm-hmm.
when I see it, because my sister and I get along very well. But, and then the second thing I wondered about is at the very end, can I go off this?
Yes, please do.
Okay. At the very end, when you talked about how, of course, Jacob crossed his hands, I'm wondering, is that representing just more friction? I mean, I feel like Jacob is keeping that animosity going, because I can't imagine that Manasseh was happy with his younger
Right.
brother after that whole entire thing.
Or the rest of his biological sons being, what? Now we have two more we have to split the inheritance with? Right. We're making some choices in the family that other people may be upset about, potentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
So from that, I'm sorry. So from that, though, I feel like we see that favoritism in families, and that just is heartbreaking. And
Yeah.
that causes usually the one that's not being favored,
Yeah.
that maybe should have some favor,
Yeah.
to just have so many issues in relationships, in life. You talk to people, you see those things, you experience it with people.
Yeah.
And right like this, you see sometimes where it has started from the parents.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's okay to have a child you connect with more. That makes sense. But the severe favoritism hurts the other children, right? Right. I see clients on a regular basis, and one of the challenges they come and they talk about their childhood, and like their siblings got Christmas gifts, and they got a Christmas gift repeatedly over the years. So their value, their worth, how they see themselves is affected by the way their caregivers give them attention. And that totally shapes who we are. Agreed.
So that was what I'm going to say. I think the one who started everything with the brother was the father.
Caregivers have a
And
responsibility.
the two wives, because all the kids were for different mothers, So imagine all that conflict between they were the slaves, sons of the girls, they were the slave, and then all coming to everything. So I think I always give the responsibility to the father. The cows, the Joseph the brothers did that so bad to him too. It doesn't matter what Joseph did, he was a kid still. The brother was older. They know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they punish him for what the father was doing wrong, instead talking to his father.
Yeah.
That fits that.
Jacob didn't want to get involved.
Yeah.
He was not wanting to get in all the people's drama. He wanted to stay to himself. And we can see from this family, and if this wasn't clear, I should have said at the very beginning, I am not trying to bash on this family. I'm trying to normalize these behaviors, say we can experience these things, and great moments of faith can still come out of this dysfunction, right? God calls us from this to behave differently, but we don't have to be a perfect family for God to love us. You don't have to be a perfect family to have faith. A lot of dysfunction, we come from that, and in some ways we're in good company, right? Good.
I think that's what has come across more to me, is that both my family of origin and even our own family, of course we've had all those kind of crazy dynamics that you see on the genograms that you put up there.
The Jerry Springer
That's-
stuff, yeah.
Yeah, that's demonstrated in Abraham's family line. And you're right, these are the patriarchs of our faith. And it's actually very encouraging to get a close look at, even amidst all of the dysfunction and chaos, God's grace and mercy and blessing and presence and power and healing is there.
Yes. It's such a great contrast, right? The faithfulness of God versus the fickleness of this family. Absolutely.
it sounded like you were saying that when Jacob crossed his hands, that he was in a sense passing on some of this dysfunction in the family.
I don't know.
I've always read that part of the story as God has told him, given him insight into the future of these two boys.
Okay, yeah.
And he was following through with the blessing from that. It seems like a different dynamic when he's following God's revelation.
Yeah, yes. So when I'm thinking more about his own family and the tension he had with his brothers, Jacob's brother Esau was not present when his dad blessed him, right? Because he would do this through trickery. So his brother wasn't even, so with the fact that the brother is present to experience this, and the grandfather, Jacob saying, no, this is the way that it's going to happen, at least they can be together in that moment, right? Esau was not present when Jacob was blessed. It was behind a closed door, right? So the other family members were not present to be part of that blessing. And I think that's what's different about this story. I don't know. Let's go back to... He's giving his blessing to these. His father said, "I know my son. I know he will become people, and he will also be great. However, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations." So he's making a proclamation, blessing the youngest of the two children he didn't know he had.
It's interesting to me that God very, very often does things differently than you think.
Yes. And it can feel uncomfortable too, right?
Yeah.
You can feel uncomfortable. It's not what I wanted or expected.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he uses unlikely heroes, and I don't know, the swapping of the hands is a very interesting thing. Anyway, does anyone else have any comments or questions that you'd like to share?
All right, I see no hands, so that'll be a secret sign between you and me. We're good to be done. So we'll pray, and I'll be up here afterwards if you have questions or other comments or observations. All right, let's pray. Father God, you are a good God. You are patient. You don't take advantage of us. You don't throw us away. You pursue us. I thank you for being such a good God in contrast to how we struggle along in our relationships. I pray you help us, give us insight into our behaviors, what we've been learning from previous generations to make some changes. I pray you give us hope for the future, for that change to come. I pray you give us fortitude and perseverance to make these changes. And I thank you that it is righteous by faith, that you will be with us today, tomorrow, next week. And it's tonight as we go home, I pray you give us the reflection